I've been lurking here for some time, waffling on whether or not I should tell this story. This is a throwaway account, because I write it other subreddits somewhat regularly. I've never told anyone about this, and have in real life people who know my username. This is a story about a number of coincidental meetings with the same group of people over nearly 3 years, with a discovery at the end that blew my mind and made me realize how lucky I had been. Warning, I'm wordy. Background: at the time of this story, I was a gay 18-year-old guy who was what the average person would probably consider attractive. I had just started college, was about to turn 19 years old, and had a night shift job. I had made enough scholarships to cover tuition, lived with my parents, and drove one of their cars. Therefore, all the money I made was expendable. I had all the freedom I could ask for. I was completely nocturnal at this point, and had an excuse to be out all night. What could go wrong, right? Now, the college town I lived in at the time was a bit podunk, so in order to have real entertainment, I had to drive about an hour to the nearest big city. This story takes place in the Midwest. Don't want to be more specific. Oh, and by entertainment, I mean sex. If you didn't know previously, there are a number of gay dating sites that are really sites to find someone to fuck around with, and I frequented these with mostly great results. Chalk it up to insecurity. I was a sheltered, unattractive, chubby teenager until well after puberty, but I was always amazed at the guys who I considered out of my league being interested in me, and how easy it was to get them into bed. Looking back, I realized this is likely because I was young and didn't realize my own attractiveness. I looked in the mirror and saw an ugly person that I hated every day for nearly a decade. But this is likely just me justifying the idiocy of the things I did back then. Enter Mike, Creeper 1. I met Mike on one of the websites. His picture showed a ripped body and a kind of mean but attractive face. He looked startling like Eminem with glasses, but more muscled and with dark hair and intentional stubble. Not much information, but upon chatting, he appeared quite normal, almost endearing, and appeared very much into me and simply couldn't wait to meet me. So, I skipped the very next night of work and headed to my old stomping grounds to meet Mike. During the whole drive, my Motorola Razr was being blown up with texts about how excited he was, how attractive he thought I was, etc. So I pull up his address, which back then I had to find with printed out MapQuest directions. It's an apartment complex that is neither cruddy nor nice, just average. Good news, he's extremely attractive. I breathe a sigh of relief. Some guys like to use 10-year-old pictures of themselves, so you can never be sure. I walked up, he smiles tensely, and takes my arm to guide me upstairs, presumably. Not in a nice way, mind you, like he took a hold of my upper arm in a vice grip and kind of pulled me up the stairs, all the while saying little of nothing. He looks back when we get upstairs at me, realizing how tight he's holding on, and give a little smile saying sorry, he's just a little excited. Alrighty then. I sit on the couch and observe the apartment, which is stuffed with expensive things that are completely unfit for an apartment complex of this caliber. Huge TVs, computers, stereos, and countless massive saltwater fish tanks filled the room, providing the only source of light in the room. The room smells faintly of cigarettes and a hint of weed, with expensive air freshener and salt water. He asks if I want to watch a movie. I say, okay. I know what's code word for. He's not the friendliest, but hey, I'm not here to make a friend, I reason, even though there's something about the situation that is setting off alarms inside my head. He sits next to me and starts with a touchy-feely, okay, that was quick. He's holding a glass of clear liquid, so I ask what he's drinking, and he says water and that he was hoping I would want some. I remember that phrase distinctly because it was such an odd way to put it. I decline, not because I'm suspicious, but I'm not here to drink water. But he won't let it go, and I'm starting to get irritated. After declining several times, he asks if I want to go to his room to get more comfortable. I say maybe, trying to be coy and avoiding the situation due to a combination of irritation and alarm and a sudden want to leave. He then proceeds with some sex talk, which is extremely explicit, and serving to make me less comfortable, I can't look him in the eyes because there is this kind of crazy, detached look, and it finally hits me. This guy is on some kind of drugs. I smell the glass when I have a chance to do so discreetly, and it's actually just water, which is odd. The sex talk dissolves into all the things he wants to do to me. Again, a little discretion, but these sites have a spot right at the bottom of the page to declare your sexual position, and he and I talked about it. At this point, I'm still more irritated than alarmed. That changes when he leans over and grabs my arm again, as he practically tries to pull me off the couch. Two realizations hit me at this point. One, while I am no slouch in the physical department, and stand a few inches taller than Mike, he has large veiny arms that could likely crack my face like a watermelon. And two, due to the circumstances of the situation, not a single person on Earth knew where I was. Now, I'm in full-fledged alarm mode. In order to kind of buy time, I blur out the first thing that comes to my head, which is that I wasn't into doing what he wanted to do in bed, and that we talked about it. He shakes his head like it was a simple misunderstanding and says, okay, he must have forgotten. He beckons me to follow him, no longer holding my arm like that, which is bruising, I can tell without looking. While trying to walk down the hallway, he trips and falls down the wall.
I realize he's definitely on something, as he mumbled something else that I still remember to this day. He said, "You have to tie me down, because that's what the cameras want." It was said so urgently, as he's looking up at me from under his eyebrows, clearly unable to get up. This seemed like crazy rambling to me at the time, but it will make sense in future stories. He also said something about his roommate coming home soon to help me. Again, I had no idea what that meant, but it made sense later on. Either way, I had no intention of sticking around until one of his friends got there. I don't remember much after that, except I made an excuse that my friends were waiting for me or something and left abruptly. Either he couldn't understand me or couldn't move to stop me, but I escaped, got into my car, and sped off. I think I went to Taco Bell or something like that, to sit and collect my thoughts and consider what I was going to do the rest of the night. I couldn't go to work 3 hours late, nor could I go home at 1 a.m. without explanation, and I was wide awake because this was my normal schedule. Unfortunately, my night was far from over, and this is where the coincidences start. I'll be happy to write more if there's interest. Sorry, that was a lot of background information. The future parts won't be like that.
This is shoddily written to my standards. This just came to me in a rush. I've never told anyone about this or written about it, remember this. So bear with the labored expression. Well, part 1 got a response, so I suppose on to part 2. I won't go over the background. Read it in the previous story. So, I'm sitting in Taco Bell on a dark, balmy summer's night, trying to shake the uneasy feeling I've gone after escaping Mike's apartment earlier. Now, a normal person would have said, fuck this whole online hookup thing, I'm going home, and never meeting anyone online ever again, but I wasn't normal. I was a hormone-crazed 18-year-old guy drunk on freedom who still hadn't gotten laid. I'm almost remiss to admit that I had a backup guy in my phone. I usually did this in case the guy I met first wasn't attractive or interesting or unable to accommodate me for the whole night. Remember, I couldn't go back to work, and I couldn't go home. The former would be frowned upon, the second suspicious, since I sure as hell was not going to admit what I'd been doing and why I was home early. So I texted Charles, who's creeper number 2 in the series, who was quite happy to hear that my plans for the night had suddenly fallen through. I had a picture saved on my phone from his online profile. It looked like a 20-something with a hat on, looking at the ground in the middle of an embarrassed laugh. No shirt, gorgeous, great smile. He said he was 29, 11 years older than me. Yeah, sure. Why not? Charles gave me directions to his house, which were simple enough. He lived in a nondescript suburb of the city I was currently in. Not ghetto, as some of the suburbs were, but not extensively rich either. I go up to the door and he promptly answers, "Son of a bitch." Unlike Mike, the person was likely not the person in his online photo. Though I kept my mouth shut, this guy was at least in his mid-30s. However, he was quite attractive and very in shape. Also, unlike Mike, he was extremely courteous and almost timid, which I thought endearing. No warning bells going off this time. Charles told me that he worked from home, so he could be up all night and was glad he had someone to keep him company. We chatted for a while, sexual innuendos start flying about. Honestly, I was having a great time, until he offered me something to drink. I asked what he had, and he told me water. That's it, just water, Has to be a coincidence, so I shook it off. Water would be great. He handed me a glass. I start to take a sip but hesitate, because my subconscious is practically screaming at me. Not only is there a kind of faint, odd taste to what if little of it touched my lips, but Charles is now staring at me expectantly and not talking. I feign a drink or two. The conversation renews. I mention that the water tastes funny. He profusely apologizes and says he got it out of the tap, he'll get me a bottle, and he does. The conversation continues, and then things start getting weird. At one point, he starts pointedly several times, something like, "You said you tasted the water, so that means you took a drink, right?" I said, "Yeah," while actively trying to convince myself that I'm imagining things. He'd asked what kind of music I like. He tells me he has an extensive library. He asks why don't I come sit on his lap, as he's already sitting at the computer. The way he said it was so pervy, and he had a cocky smile on his face that just gave me chills, and for those reasons alone I tactfully declined. He then goes to visit the bathroom and comes back in some very skimpy underwear and nothing else. Whatever his age, he is in great shape and has a very nice ass. Hormones activate. Off to bed. I won't give you details here, but two odd things at this stage that I remember and are worth mentioning. Firstly, he begged and pleaded for me not to use a condom, which I refused over and over and over again. He said the next time he'd be the one wearing the condom, that I tactfully informed him that was not going to happen. He finally consented on both points, but told me that I'm lucky, because no one ever had the nerve to tell him no. Bad things happen to people who say no. Maybe that was a joke, I thought, but his delivery was a little too menacing to be funny. Once the festivities were over, things got weirder. He got really hyper and got a laptop to show me his favorite YouTube videos. I honestly just wanted to have a cigarette and take a nap and then leave, but there was no rest to be had. His tastes in videos were odd and morbid. Eventually, he shut that off and we laid there in the dark. I'm finally thinking I can go to sleep, but Charles just chatters on like he's got ADHD, one topic to the next, but gradually comments about how I'm the most special guy he's ever met, and he's so glad he found me. He had a spare room. He let me move in rent-free if I helped remodel it, with no clothes on, of course. Before I finally went to sleep, he practically planned the whole thing out about how I was going to move in, and we would live happily ever after. I could help him run his business too, he kept saying. I wake up to him staring at me. So close, I was startled. Son of a bitch. He starts asking for sex again, no condom. His turn to do such and such to me, etc. I refused repeatedly. He then asked if I want to go to Denny's for breakfast. I actually was hungry, and he's paying, so I consent, and I didn't want to be rude. What the fuck was I thinking? Suffice it to say, it was the most awkward meal ever. He insisted on ordering for me, chattered and chattered while I developed a headache. Then he headed for maximum weirdness territory. I had mentioned that I worked at a certain large grocery chain, so he took me to the local one to apply there so I could have a job when I moved in. I refused over and over, and he wasn't having it. He essentially forced me into the store and was talking to someone about me applying. I was extremely embarrassed and uncomfortable, and starting to get afraid because of his pushiness and the fact that I had no mode of transportation and had no idea where I was. Then some guy in the store referred to me as his son while speaking to another person, and we left. Charles looked like he was about to murder someone. At long last, we got back, and I said I had to leave. It literally took half an hour. He was so insistent on me staying. And now that we were alone, I was even more afraid. At that point, I had a dead phone. No one knew where I was, and I had no way to leave. I considered running to a neighbor's house yelling for help, as I considered asking someone in the place to call the police. But my embarrassment in having to do such a thing, after all, I didn't feel like I was in physical danger and he hadn't really done anything to me, so that stopped me. It just seemed unthinkable for some reason at the time. I just felt trapped in the situation while simultaneously blaming myself and beating myself up for getting into the situation. Only a number of lies about me coming back that night finally convinced him to give me my car keys, which he had hidden somewhere. Upon his admission that he had hidden them, I honestly considered trying to just knock him out. Unlike Mike from earlier, I was semi-confident that I could take this guy if I had to, and I possessed a mix of fear, irritation, and anger that would likely help me to do so. At last, I was able to leave, and I drove home and just slept. I woke up the next evening, remember sleeping during the days, to a full inbox of messages. They were all from Charles. Where are you? Are you still coming over tonight? Can't wait to see you. I don't like liars. You don't want to be on my bad side. I think I love you. If you were with me, you can have anything you want. Hey, I was just out. I bought you a new car. Let's take it for a test drive tonight. They went on like that and frantic. Nearly 100 sent in the span of 8 hours or so. Back then, I only have 500 texts a month, so I frantically text back that I can't come tonight and please stop texting so goddamn much. He fills my inbox again. I eventually give up replying. My mom and dad had a good yell at me for going over my text limit. They had an extra $50 charge on the bill, which translates to nearly 1,000 text messages, if I remembered correctly. I just sheepishly apologized and paid it off. I couldn't tell them what was really going on. The texts got nastier and more threatening. Some contained pictures, one in particular, sent to me during a bribing phase. It was a picture of a muscly guy, naked and lying on his stomach, tied up and gagged. The caption under the picture read something like, "Wanna join me? He'll be here all night." I didn't let myself believe it then. But the guy in the picture looked like the Mike guy from earlier that night when I had met Charles. I was so startled. I couldn't wrap my head around it. How is that possible, and why would that Mike guy be at Charles' house? I stared and stared at that picture, though the naked guy's face was turned away. He did not look like he was having fun and was not wearing glasses. I really couldn't tell. Eventually, I decided it didn't matter. So what if it was Mike? And so what if I met them in the same night? It was just coincidence, if anything. The text died off after a while, though they went on for at least 3 months, costing me likely $200 and several exasperated lectures from my parents, and hell, I never have to see either of them again, so I could just forget about it, right? Now, part 3 is where shit really starts hitting the fan, if this installment wasn't weird enough for ya. After my encounter with Charles and subsequent harassment was over, I moved out of my parents' house and into the same big Midwest city, where my misadventures have been taking place to continue my college career. Mostly, I wanted to move because I wanted more freedom. That summer and the following year, I was out of control, mostly in regards to drinking and sleeping around, especially now that I had my own place to retreat to every night. If you're wondering, no, I did not stop using the dating websites. However, after all that had happened, I mostly slept around with the guys I already knew. This avoided the anxiety of meeting someone new, and decreased the odds that I was going to end up in a Mike or Charles situation. However, one fine fall day, I got in contact with a guy named Tony, whose profile said he was 18. Great, I was 19, and it was hard to find anyone my age. He was new to the area and looked extremely young, which he assured me was just how he looked, and that everyone told him that, but he really was 18. Tony was short, thin, with short dark hair and dark eyes, aka adorable. Tony had a situation, one that he described in poor details. He said he had come from one state over to stay with some friends, but he wasn't enjoying himself and didn't have a car, so he couldn't leave. I thought that was odd, but he seemed really sad, actually almost desperate. In addition to the cuteness and his general charm, I thought I'd go outside the box to meet this harmless guy. So off I drove to get Tony based on his shoddy directions. As I approached the address, I knew that it looked familiar, but it was big city, and I had been just about everywhere. As I turned down the last road, I know there was no mistaking that. I had been to this burb before, and I was right. I came to a dead-end turnaround in a middle-class suburb, and just to my right was a familiar house, the very same one I had spent an uncomfortable night, and not 3 months before, with a despicable Charles. I was already turning around in a panic, and I thought this must be a trick of Charles to lure me back in. But there was a guy who looked just like Tony standing outside, who waved to me, and was kind of jogging towards the car already. I hesitated, but for whatever reason, the look on his face made me I stayed and he got in. There was no car in the driveway. I argued with myself that perhaps this was a coincidence. There's that word again, and maybe Charles didn't live there anymore. I didn't bring up the house or what was going on, but I treated him with suspicion the whole night. We went to eat, cruise around town, and slowly I realized I was becoming very endeared to Tony. Despite my reservations, I had no suspicious alarms going on at this time. Quite the opposite. He was just the nicest guy, and about as physically intimidating as a fly. Eventually, I took him back to his friend's house, asking if I could see him again tomorrow, to which he eagerly replied, yes. I remember distinctly the most awkwardly long hesitation before he got out of the car, and I knew something was up, but I kept my mouth shut. I drove away, and after not even 2 blocks, Tony called and asked if I could come back and get him because his friends had kicked him out. He was on the verge of tears, I could tell. Naturally, I turned around, even though I knew something was definitely fishy. When I arrived back, there were 3 guys outside. None of them were Charles, but there was still no car in the driveway, so I assumed it was safe. The scene was an odd one. There were 2 young guys with jeans on, no shoes or shirt, leaning against the house smoking. Both looked either exhausted or drugged up, I couldn't tell, with purple circles under their eyes, which were only half open. Both were incredibly attractive, even with a look of stupor on their faces. They had hauled out Tony's suitcase from the looks of it, which he picked up and lunged to my car. We were not a block away from the house, and Tony starts crying hysterically, so I took him home. My roommates, a guy and a girl couple, my age and engaged, took it in stride, as they had several random guys walk through the house at this point. Tony explained what was going on, and it went something like this. Charles had contacted him via the same website, and Tony had divulged that he had come out to his parents, and he was essentially living in a public library, showering at his friend's parents' house once in a while. Charles played sympathetic and told Tony that he had a room he could stay at and would help him find a job. He'd even come down to wherever and pick him up, and Tony, out of desperation, and because Charles was so damn charming, took him up on immediately. Tony told me that as soon as he got in the car, he knew it was a mistake. Charles made sexual advances on him even while driving, and once he got to his house, he basically attempted to order Tony to have sex with the other 2 roommates so Charles could watch and videotape him. Tony refused and locked himself in his room, and Charles left him alone, but he could hear the other 3 going at it all night, and it didn't sound pretty. Tony hadn't slept the whole of last night. He was so scared of Charles creeping in, and had been crying and at a loss for what to do. That same night that I got Tony home, shit started going down. At about 10 p.m., I get a text from Charles. All it said was something like, "It looks like you and Tony are getting along all right." My heart just stopped. I was suddenly frantic, but said nothing because I didn't want Tony to freak out too. My first thought was that he must have followed us. The thing is, he said looks, implying he could see us. It was a horror movie moment. I've never been so irrationally scared in my whole life, and my roomies had just gone to dinner, presumably to give Tony and I alone time. I had 3 large windows that faced the parking lot, so I started trying to scan to see Charles' big black sedan outside, but it was too dark outside and my jank apartment complex was very poorly lit. Tony wanted to just go to bed, so I let him, and then I went around checking and double-checking the doors. We lived on the 3rd floor, so I felt secure. I turned all the lights off and looked out the window, and did indeed see what looked like a black Pontiac G8 Kitty corner to my building, but it was hard to tell and I couldn't see who was in the car. I got another text. "I'll come pick up my boy tomorrow. You two have a good night." Something of the way he said "my boy" just made me want to break his neck in half, but I stayed put. The car eventually left. At long last, the roommates came home and I felt safe again. I explained Tony would be here for a few days and want to sleep, wondering if I should tell them or not. The car returned the next day and the next, but no texts. Tony made up with his dad via phone, and I bought him a bus pass and took him to the bus stop the next day. The G8 was there when we left, but the windows were so heavily tinted I didn't see who, if anyone, was inside the car. It drove by with a defiant glare, and checked that it didn't follow. I was really sad to see Tony go. It was one of those things where you wish you would have met a person under better circumstances, but I knew he couldn't stay forever, even though the roomies seemed to love him. The damn G8 was still there when I got home, but still no movement. The car remained for the next few days, sometimes there, sometimes not, but I never saw it coming or going, so couldn't tell if anyone was inside of it. I was being constantly vigilant during those few days, tense and cranky as well. I considered just walking out to the car to confront whoever was there, if there was anyone there, but it was mostly there at night, and something about the poorly lit parking lot just creeped me out, so that I lost my nerve every time to do that. Why I didn't call the police, I don't know, except for the embarrassment of trying to explain the situation and the fact that nothing had actually happened. One day, while walking to the bus stop at the end of the apartment driveway, I heard a car start up in another parking lot and creep out of the parking lot and down the driveway behind me. I nearly had a panic attack thinking Charles was there and was going to run me down or try to abduct me. Again, I'm not a small person, but there's just something about irrational fear when someone gets in your head like that. If he was attempting to freak me out, it was definitely working. It wasn't the same car at all, just a little blonde girl going to class. But I was so relieved, I think I actually broke down right in the driveway. I realized I hadn't been asleep right, and I've been kind of living like a shut-in paranoid freak for nearly a week, and it was getting to me. So I turned around, confirmed the car was still there, marched up and told my roommate, the guy, what was going on, and he got his baseball bat. He was a hard-ass mofo, who likely would have brought a knife or something worse, had I not requested he didn't. We went downstairs and started crossing the lot, heading straight towards the car. It suddenly started its engine and tore out, and I never saw it again. For months after, I would have little irrational panic attacks anytime I saw a car that I thought was a black G8. There was driving next to me on the bus the same week, and I almost went off my rocker, panicky, claustrophobic, cold sweat type of thing, until I realized the windows weren't tinted, and the guy driving it was definitely not Charles. Or I would have to reassure myself that that one wasn't black, just dark green, or that it was a G6, not a G8, or whatever it took to talk myself out of thinking that it was him. The worst part was, I have no idea if it was actually him in the first place. I mean, I never saw him physically, and he could have just been pretending in those texts. Somehow, the not knowing, I think, made it worse, and why I had that irrational fear of the car, and not so much of him. To this day, though, I still think it was him and wonder how the hell he didn't have anything better to do than sit in my parking lot being an asshole all day for an entire week. If you all aren't tired of all this reading, there's 2 more parts coming. The next one's worse. The last one is just sad and details just how lucky I'd been. I really have to put some music in and go to my happy place to tell this part. This is a detail of hands down the worst, scariest, and just downright shittiest night of my life. As you'll see, my own idiocy played a big part in this, to a point which it frustrates me to think how consistently stupid I was back then, but, well, just see for yourself. A quick prelude to the last new characters in the story. Months passed after I met Tony that sent him on his way. It was now the summertime again, almost 1 year exactly after I had originally met Charles. I was starting to look for a bit more serious relationship. I was, frankly, tired of sleeping around at this point and becoming increasingly paranoid of STDs. I was online one day, checking around my site, when I met Trey. Trey was an Adonis. Perfect incarnate. Surfer long blonde hair, a face chiseled by the gods, and not a trace of body fat to be found. We chatted back and forth, and Trey told me a few things about himself, particularly that he was in a similar place to me, tired of being wild and just wanting to settle down. Trey had poor self-esteem, mostly due to the fact that he wasn't very bright and knew it. I, however, found him extremely endearing. Soon enough, he invites me over for a swim in the pool at his apartment complex. As per usual, MapQuest led me to his apartment complex, which I knew I'd been to before but couldn't recall when. There was Trey, laid out in the sun, looking positively breathtaking. He was with a girl, and they were the only one in the pool, which I thought was odd. I introduced myself. Trey gives me a hug and a warm smile. The girl just says, "Hey." I quickly learned that they're best friends, but Lauren, the girl, is just one of those late 20-somethings who's packed in a lot of living and is paying up for it. Wrinkles, bags under her eyes, a rough smoker's voice, you know the type, with a pound of makeup, still attractive. I think the phrase is, rode hard and put away wet. Lauren had a very dark sense of humor, and seemed a bit cruel, even to her best friend. I also discovered that the apartment was Lauren's, bought for her by her sugar daddy, as was her car and a lot of her other possessions. Lauren proudly announced that she hadn't had to work in nearly 4 years and still lived like a queen. When I made a joke about how lucky she was, she gave me a dark look and said something like, "Don't get too jealous, hun. I had to work for it in other ways, believe me." That being said, we smoked a few cigarettes, had a few beers, and overall, it was a lovely afternoon. Lauren went up for a nap, as the strenuous afternoon of laying by the pool had presumably tuckered her out, and I told Trey I had to go. Trey leaned over and said very quietly in my ear, almost in an embarrassed voice, that he thought I was really cute and hoped that he could see me again soon. I was never so flattered in my whole life to be called attractive by this guy, who also turned out to be insanely nice. My luck. 2 weeks passed after that. As Trey and Lauren were moving, Trey was a great person to talk to, and it became quickly apparent that he was becoming obsessed with me. He seemed impressed by my smartness. He admitted that he had never graduated high school, and my job and my fancy-sounding major, which I was about to graduate from early. The sex talk also began. The pictures he sent me nearly gave me a heart attack. I'm ashamed to say I still have them. So when he asked to take me on a date once the move was over, there was no hesitation in my mind. He said he wanted to drop by a party on the way to his house, and he would pick me up on the way back from work, and I agreed. I know, I'm an idiot, and a slow learner. He did. We went to the party, Gay creepers galore. I was new and young, and hated by many since I had somehow caught Trey's attention over the others. Soon, we left there and went to his house. The house was in a very new suburb development project, secluded, kinda in the middle of an empty field, where all the houses are brand new and nearly identical. But it was very nice. There was a kind of eerie light coming from the windows. Would you like to take a guess as to what it was? Saltwater fish tanks. The house was filled with them. At least 10 huge, expensive tanks. I made the connection immediately. Trey and Lauren lived at the same apartment complex I had met Mike at nearly a year ago, which was all filled with saltwater fish tanks as well. I still try to rationalize this. It just has to be a coincidence. As Trey flirts around the room, enthusiastically telling me all about his fish, yes, they were his tanks, I almost relax, since they were really pretty cool. Then I hear movement downstairs, and from the fully finished basement comes a glowing pile of muscle, which confirms my suspicions immediately. It's Mike, looking bigger and meaner than the last time I saw him. Jeans, no shirt, and no shoes, followed by his polar opposite, a thin, woffish-looking Asian guy in nothing but briefs and a white beater. Trey introduces me to Mike, who replies that he knows me, we've met. Trey's face goes white, and he's at a loss for words. The Asian guy is introduced as Mike's boyfriend, but I can't remember his name. Mike goes to the fridge to get a glass of water from a pitcher within, and gulps down a couple glasses and gives Asian boyfriend one as well. He then has a cryptic conversation with Trey. Something like this. Why are you home and why'd you bring him? You know he's coming over tonight. He never comes on Saturday. Why would he be here tonight? You need to lay off that stuff. You're gonna overdo it again. Fuck off! I had no idea what they were talking about, but Mike seemed like he was in an okay mood and had a boyfriend to occupy him sexually, so I try to remain calm. Trey wants to go outside and have a bonfire, so we can chat alone and have some more beers and a smoke, and I agree. All is well, for maybe half an hour or so. Until I hear noises from inside the house. We rush in to find Mike in the living room convulsing on the floor, having what looks to be a seizure, which scares me shitless. Asian boyfriend and Trey just try to keep him rolled to the side, acting like this is a routine. After a few minutes, Mike straightens up and jumps on Trey and starts riding him around piggyback while kind of choking him and sputtering obscenities. Trey just calmly lets it happen and talks him down for a minute. I'm absolutely at a loss for what's happening. Mike is talking nonsense and yelling at people. His eyes are unfocused and crazy looking, and he keeps falling over and over. Although sudden, he locks onto me, gets into my face and says, "You, what the fuck are you doing here?" Trey explains in a calm voice who I am. Mike moves on to his boyfriend and just starts hitting him, ordering him downstairs right now. Asian boyfriend scuttles down the stairs and they disappear. None of these events are explained to me. Just then, as I'm contemplating how the best way to get out of his house is, the door opens, and in walks Lauren, followed by the one and only Charles. He sees me immediately, and after only a second of surprise, he comes over to me and gives me a hug like we're old friends. Lauren catches on immediately and gives me a death stare. Apparently, she put two and two together and realized that I'd fucked her sugar daddy. My mind is reeling and I'm just terrified as Charles whispers in my ear, "Don't worry, we'll talk later," followed by a kiss on the cheek. The hug half lingers, and I'm forced up against a despicable human being for nearly a minute, while everyone just chats, thinking Trey, who saw this happen, might say something about another guy kissing his date. I look over. Trey just looks defeated. He exchanges a terse hello with Charles, who suggests we should watch a movie. So, like one big happy family, we all trundle downstairs to sit on a wraparound leather couch and watch some movie that I don't even recall. For at least the first half of the movie, We are treated to the sounds of what seems to be Asian boyfriend being tortured to death by Mike in the room just behind us. I feel bad for him, but then realize he might be into that kind of thing. I've heard stranger. Needless to say, I'm wildly uncomfortable. They eventually come out and join us with the same attire. Charles asks Mike if he got it on camera. Mike says yes. Charles responds with a patronizing thigh tap and a good boy. He turns to me with a sickening smile every 5 minutes, and we all sit there watching the goddamn movie for an hour and a half. No one is speaking. Charles is the only one who appears at ease and is laughing at the movie. The movie at long last ends. Charles wants to go out to the bonfire, but first orders Mike into his room. Charles follows, and the rest of us go upstairs, thank God, because the noises were starting to make me sick. I tell Trey I'm tired and want to go to bed. He says okay to my relief, and we go into his room and lay in the dark. We don't speak, which is awkward, but I'm okay with it, because awkward is preferable to terrified. At least there's a door between me and the crazies, of course. My 4-year-old phone is dead, because the battery doesn't hold a charge for more than a couple hours. Upon realizing this, I have to struggle not to tear up. Trey asks if I want to fool around, to which I say no because I'm tired. In reality, that was the last thing on my mind. I did let him kind of cuddle up to me because it made me feel a bit safer. That lasted for about 10 minutes, until there's a knock at the door. It's Charles, who orders us out to the bonfire. I tell Trey I'm too tired, I don't want to go. Again, he agrees, but says he has to go out there, which I'm not happy about, but okay. Now, Trey's bed was directly beneath a window, and the bonfire was not 30 feet away from it, and the window was open. I could hear a good hour of conversation. Among the topics of conversations were the sick things that Charles had done doing to Mike, which only he and Lauren laughed about, and me. All about me. Charles did not waver from the topic of myself the whole time. The things he said ranged from frighteningly graphic descriptions of what he'd do to me, to practical professions of love and rants about what a great guy I am, and how nice I seem to be during this time. I also gathered that they were all drinking alcohol as well as water, which clearly was something other than water. I was hoping that Trey would say something when Charles was being nasty about me, but he didn't. At least he didn't join in, though. Lauren hated me, and didn't stop insulting everything about me, but at the same time had to simper along and agree with whatever Charles said. Bitch. Suddenly, I didn't hear Charles' voice anymore. The knob on the door started turning, and at a loss for what to do and guessing correctly that it was Charles, I just pretended to be asleep. He walked right over to the bed, standing only inches from my face. I was at the edge closest the door. I cracked my one eye just enough to see his silhouette looking down at me in the dark. It was at that point that I was the most frightened. I know you aren't asleep. He backed off and sat in a chair and started ranting. It was about how betrayed he was, how he opened up his heart to me, and wanted me to be his. He wanted me to help run his business. I was just the greatest guy ever, because I was smart and attractive, and his guys liked me a lot, and trusted me, and I'd be good for them. Did I have any idea how honored I should have been that he let me fuck him and offered his home to me? Then the rant got more crazy. He started calling me nasty names and demanded that I answer him. When I didn't, he just walked back to his original spot, looking down at me, and I heard him unbuckle his belt. I couldn't tell you what happened after that, except that we kind of wrestled. He was pushing my face to the side and downward and holding on to my wrists, while I was pushing his face upwards and to the side. I think I heard on Oprah that there are 2 rules to follow when someone is trying to rape you. 1, never go to a second location, and 2, fight like crazy with whatever means necessary. He was too far up on my torso for me to kick him in the groin, but the pain in my face was starting to make me go from scared to angry. He was also saying things about how he liked it that I struggled, which pissed me off beyond belief. I got a surge of anger and adrenaline, yanked my hand free, grabbed both of his shoulders, and pushed him up and off me. Somehow we were then vertically wrestling with him up against the wall, and he's holding both my wrists. I take one step back and kneed him as hard as possible right under the ribs. It was over just like that. Charles crumpled. Likely had the wind knocked out of him, judging by the grasp, and then he started vomiting all over the floor. A part of me wanted to beat him bloody, and another just wanted to sit and cry. The second part went over. The darnest thing was, I look over and all four of them, Mike, the boyfriend, Trey, and Lauren, are standing in the doorway, likely just watching the entire thing. No one intervened to help him, thank God, but then no one tried to stop him from raping me. Lauren helped Charles up, and they left without a word. I demanded Trey take me home, and he did. I texted him the next day and said I never wanted to see him again, and that I hope he got out of whatever situation he was in. The thing is, you'd think I feel accomplished after a situation like that, but I didn't. I felt violated and angry at myself more than anything. I shut myself into my room for the weekend, feigning sickness. I never told anyone what happened until now. It wasn't until a week later, once I was thinking rationally again, that I realized I should call the police. For reasons I don't fully remember. I didn't want them to know who I was and have to explain the whole background to it, because I was too embarrassed and still blaming myself for it. So I decided I made an anonymous call and told them there were drugs in a house I'd been to and where the house was. I wouldn't learn the outcome of that call for nearly a year. Now the last part is about what I found out after the fact from meeting one of their victims and what happened to Trey. Sorry you had to wait so long. Here's the conclusion to the series. After all the events, I heard from Trey again a handful of times, and most of them were apologies for what happened and veal pleas for me not to call the police, which I did anyways about a week later anonymously. After a few days, he stopped texting, and I never heard from any of them ever again, until I messaged Trey years later. So you're probably wondering why I bothered to write another post if I never saw them again. This part is more of my after-the-fact knowledge of what was going on and an illustration of what might have happened to me and how lucky I was to somehow avoid the situation. After a year after the events in the previous part, I was hanging out with a guy that I had at one time had a fling with. We had become friendly afterwards, and he lived right down the road, so we had coffee occasionally, and I would help him with his chemistry homework. His name was Javi. A part Mexican guy who was, as you might have guessed, 18, and very youngish looking but really cute. This particular day, he was looking very sad, and we were eating bagels or something at a coffee shop when he broke down and started crying. When I asked him what was wrong, he told me something really bad had happened to him a few months ago, and he was trying to keep it a secret. His story went something like this. Javi met a guy named Mike online, very similar to the way I did. Mike took Javi to a party at a guy named Charles's house, where there was free booze, and everyone was very nice to him and very flirty. He and Mike made out. He said that he thought he might be in love. Mike was so nice to him. He also had a very good impression of Charles upon first meeting, which goes to show you how some people just don't have that instinct for spotting creepers, unfortunately. Nothing happened at the first party. He was a little weirded out that Mike didn't have a job and had only very recently gotten out of jail because he was caught with a small amount of cocaine at his friend's house when some asshole called the police on him. The time frame fit. I'm pretty sure that arrest was my doing. I was that asshole. He then went to a second party at Mike's invite, again at Charles's house. This party was different than the first, as there were only around 20 older guys there, and what appeared to be a couple of younger prostitutes that were clearly on drugs, and the atmosphere was decidedly less happy. Javi felt woozy and kinda blacked out not long after getting to the party. He doesn't remember if he drank any water, which I asked him about specifically, but he definitely did drink. Although he didn't remember what happened next very well, He remembered snippets of being tied up and raped by what he estimates to be 5 to 10 of the guys, including Charles himself. He also mentioned that Mike and a guy with long blonde hair being in the room with him, also tied up and being raped. He woke up the next day, obviously in pain, where Charles and what I think was Laura from his description tried to give him a BS excuse for what happened, saying he asked for it and that he drank too much, etc. They also knew, thanks to Javi telling Mike his life story, that Javi's parents were Catholic and very strict. He worked for and lived with his father, who did not know he was gay, but he was threatened repeatedly by Laura and Charles, both in person and via text, that if he went to the police, they would tell his parents that he was gay and show them pictures and videos that had Javi during the rape episode. Whether due to shame or fear, Javi kept quiet, only telling a couple people, including me. He didn't even go to the hospital after he was taken to a friend's house the morning after he was raped. To make matters worse, he had gone to the Department of Health to get an HIV test the same day that he and I were having lunch, and the test had come out positive, which is why he finally broke down. He then considered going to the police, but when it's that long after the fact, the rape kit won't pick anything up. Needless to say, Javi was not in a good place. Now that's a paraphrase of what he and I talked about, and we talked about it many times after that, because I was the only one he felt like he could talk to. He gave me very graphic illustrations of what happened, but I don't think those are necessary here. Suffice it to say, I was shocked to realize just how close my life had to being ruined several times by meeting these same people. Over the course of the next few months, more details started coming out. One of Javi's friends also had an encounter with these people, and he had had an experience similar to mine, creepy but not like Javi's. It wasn't until I met my current boyfriend through Facebook, no less, when he told me a story of meeting Trey a few months before he met me. Trey was standing outside a Little Caesars when my boyfriend walked by. Trey surmised he was gay because my boyfriend is overdressed beyond reason 24/7, and being the blunt kind of guy he is, Trey straight up asked him if he could hang out sometime. They went on several nights later to have drinks. Trey got wasted and spilled a whole bunch of secrets to my boyfriend. This is nearly 2.5 years ago, remember, which were then relayed to me a few weeks ago, during a chance conversation we were having inside the car. Between Javi's friend and Trey's confession to my boyfriend, I pieced together additional details of how Charles's scheme worked. They may not be exact to the point, but this is essentially what I pieced together. Charles originally met Mike years ago and they started dating, based on the fact that they were both into BDSM kind of activities. Eventually they looked for third and found Trey, a gorgeous young guy who was basically homeless after his piece of shit mother had kicked him out. Eventually it devolved into Mike and Trey taking drugs to simulate a more fully a rape experience for Charles. Trey admitted to my boyfriend that he hated it and always had, but the drugs made it easier because he didn't care what was happening when he was high. Mike, on the other hand, became very addicted to the drug they were taking now with regularity, and Charles was happy to supply it. Now, no one ever told me what drug it was, if anyone knew at all, but it was definitely in the water, and it was some form of date rape drug. Some people suggested that it might be GHB, and from Wikipedia that's what it sounds like it was. I don't know that for certain though. Anyways, at some point, Charles got the bright idea of having other perverts over and charged them for the experience of raping Mike and Trey in the same way that he was doing with all the drugs and that stuff. And Mike and Trey went along with it because they were getting paid quite nicely for their trouble, and Charles provided for them everything that they needed. He also met Laura, as Charles was apparently bisexual, and paid all of her expenses too to facilitate his business, have weird sex with him, and be a kind of overseer for his guys, aka Trey and Mike. He also had 2 or 3 unnamed house guests himself, but their involvement is a mystery, though I suspect they were the prostitutes Javi spoke of and were likely involved in the same activities as Mike and Trey. On top of that, they videotaped everything they did and made a pseudo-porn site where they taped their adventures and sold them on the internet. There were even live feed type things, which I surmise is what Mike was trying to rope me into that night, in which I first met him. After even some more time, they started to try to get other guys to participate, and when they found none, they started tricking people into their schemes. This was no doubt well received by the clientele, as this was actual rape and not pseudo-consensual, like when Mike and Trey drugged themselves. My boyfriend told me that. Trey said they only managed this a few times, as it was usually too risky. Mike recruited the guys and Trey refused. Trey was very adamant that he was not trying to trick my boyfriend into anything. He actually wanted the opposite. He wanted out of the situation and out of Charles's house. And apparently, he figured the quickest way to do that was to find another guy to take care of him, which makes sense, considering the mentality that would develop from the way he lived for so many years. Now, if you're looking for justice here, I have very good news. The best part, though, is what happened to Charles right after. Javi told me his story. I convinced Javi to tell his older brother, at least, what had happened to him and that he was gay. They were very close, and his brother took it well. The thing about this guy, and I met him once, is that he's a quasi-gangster with a lot of quasi-gangster friends who are likely involved in some shady affairs of their own. He told Javi that he and his guys would take care of Charles, and according to Javi, they marched over to his house in the middle of the night and beat him silly, or something to that effect. He wouldn't tell Javi what he did. Fast forward to about a year ago, before my boyfriend told me he knew Trey. When Trey popped up in my friend you may know on Facebook, I clicked out of curiosity and saw that he lived in California now. After so much time, I no longer hated him, which I did at first for what happened. I mostly felt pity for him. So in a bout of curiosity, I don't know why, I messaged him and asked how he was doing. We actually ended up talking for some time. It was very therapeutic for me. Mostly because he gave me the final good news of the whole story. Charles had died. More specifically, he had been sexually brutalized and then murdered by one of his house guests shortly after he moved out of town. I actually think he moved to Canada, but I don't recall it and I deleted my Facebook. To top it off, Mike was in prison for going wild and assaulting a bunch of people at a bar, where he was found to be possessing a large amount of cocaine. To this day, I try to convince myself that I shouldn't be happy about Charles, but to be honest, I kinda am. I'll never forget that horrifying night, but even worse is the fact that Javi, and God knows how many other guys, have had their lives ruined. I feel nothing but sympathy for Trey, and I feel bad for Mike in a way too. The problem is that I will always remember Mike most clearly as the guy that scared me shitless in his apartment when I was 18 years old. That was the first time I'd ever felt physically in danger. And you don't forget that anytime soon. I know this feels rushed, and I have very little left to say. Those are essentially the events as they happened, with much paraphrasing. If you have questions, comment. If something's unclear, let me know and I'll revise it. I'm at work, and this is a lot of typing, and this story is just mentally exhausting to type out.